All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday morning. I'd like to now reconvene the RDI TPA workgroup meeting. As you know, we stopped in the middle of 3A yesterday. So we'll be returning to 3A. We'll continue with 4A, 5A, and then skip into today's agenda. So you kind of have an idea of what we're going to be doing. As mentioned yesterday, workgroup members who participate remotely will need to disclose if any individuals 18 years of age or older are present in the room at the remote location, and the general nature of the member's relationship with any such individuals. Are there any disclosures from members attending via Zoom this morning? Great, thank you. As a reminder, workgroup members who are participating via Zoom must be visible at all times on camera. Please log off Zoom if you need to leave the meeting and log in when you're ready to rejoin the meeting. If you experience any broadband or internet connectivity problems while participating in the meeting, that would be remedied by joining without video. You must announce the reason for your non-appearance when you turn off your camera. And with that, we will take roll call this morning. Recording Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Devin Beasley.
Here.
Anissa Brown.
Here.
Patricia Camarero. Here. Kathy Kulisha. Here. Javier Diaz-Catana.
Here.
Rand Duker.
Here.
Vanessa Escobar. Here. Ursula Estrada Ravelas.
You'll be here.
Corey Harvey.
You'll be here tonight.
Colleen Haseman. Alicia Herrera. Here. Linda Hung. Here. Jason Morgan. Joshua Northam.
Here.
Benjamin Odell.
Here.
Wendy Redfern. Here. Kathleen Rowley.
Here.
Rebecca Sackett.
Here.
Tina Sloan. Gina Sullivan. Julie Walliner. Here. Matt Wallace. Beverly Young. Here. We have a quorum.
And then Jason.
Fantastic. All right, so with that, we are actually going to jump straight into our breakout rooms. So we're going to return to the same breakout rooms that we were in yesterday. Your job this morning is to review what you created yesterday, refine it however you see fit, and then be prepared to come back to this room and present it to the work group as a whole. After further discussion, we were initially thinking of prioritizing those recommendations, but we would like to just take the recommendations and then allow us a month to sit with it and think about them, since this will be the first time you see them. So all you're doing when you come back from your work group breakout meetings is just presenting what your group came up with. We'll spend the next month grappling with that, and then we'll come back and discuss it again at the next meeting. Then we'll move into a second breakout room. You may go back to the same group or a different group, and we're going to be working on focus area 2 and model the same way that we did the first one. So hopefully we'll be able to jump right into that one. Our goal is to spend about 30 minutes initially this morning. Then we'll come back, do about a 20-30-minute presentation of all of the groups, and then we'll move straight in. We'll have about 2 hours to work on the next set of recommendations. Then we'll take a lunch break. After our lunch break, we'll continue into Thursday's agenda, where we will hear a presentation about accreditation and induction. And that should be about the time that we conclude our day. And we'll start to think about recommendations for focus area 3. Any questions from the group before we move into?
A technology question. Are we able to use any screens in the room? We can, like, I know Devin, right? You have so he can display it, and then we can look at it, and then we can edit it in full time.
When we're talking about like wordsmithing, I think some way of wordsmithing visuals would be helpful. So I got an expo marker for whiteboards, but I don't know if there is a way of screen share.
Vanessa.
If you can join Zoom and then.
Oh, we can't even, can we use whiteboards or no?
Should be visible
It should-
to the public.
Well, that's if we screen share the Zoom room, see, right?
Yeah.
This could be scary sharing the screen.
So just to put the conversation out here. So the question is, how can we share our screen in these breakouts so that the public can see it? And the workaround which you were using yesterday, right?
Right.
Is to whoever the recorder is, clean up your desktop, hide all the files, and open up a document and join Zoom. You will be promoted to a panelist, and then you can share your screen and you can do all the wordsmithing, and we have tech support in all the rooms that will be available to help you.
Do that, join now, because I needed to give you guys permission to do that. So co-host, so.
I have another question. Adam, do we need to use the Word? Do we need to use Word? Keep it in the doc you sent us last night?
Yeah, I think as much as I prefer Google Docs and those types of the Google Suite and collaboration tools like that, I think for purposes of Bagley Keene, let's keep it to static Word docs.
Okay, thank you.
During our month of processing and digesting, will we get another ranking, scoring? What type of procedure will then be? Because we're making there's recommendations out there that I'm not part of, so we want to be able to fully understand.
Yes.
what that
So we'll have a couple of different homework assignments, similar to what we've done in the past. For focus area 1, hopefully 2 as well, and then also 3.
I will be harassing you with Google Forms and asking for, sorry, Beverly, for another pass at indicating support, and then those will come back to you with the supports and the charts. Also worth mentioning is the document that you're looking at. Your product from this will be retained in a box right above all of the antecedent or the preceding recommendations. So you'll be able to trace the through line from where you were, the recommendations that were organized to your work product here. So you'll be able to, everybody will be able to check that.
All right. So with that, let's move into our workout or breakout rooms. We need about 5 minutes to get them started.
Yeah, five minutes to connect.
So take care of yourselves for 5 to 10 minutes and then we'll get started on the work. Please be prepared to be back in here by 9:30 to do the presentation. Okay.
Those that need to share screen, join the main room first. Stay there, wait till I promote you guys, then.
Great work.
I'm just gonna leave. Yeah, I can't use it.
I know. You can have it though.
Did you need everyone's name at the top?
Yeah, that'd be great. Be helpful so I could recirculate it. The group. Sense of third coming my way.
No, Tori, can you guys hear us?
Yes. Can you hear us?
Yes.
I have 3.
Do you know who was sending your groups in, Adam?
Oh, I don't know if it was Kathleen or Tori.
Adam, I shared it to you as an Outlook document, as a 360 document. And so you should have it and you should have editing abilities, but I'll go back in and make sure it went through.
Okay.
I have confidence that they'll get it to me, and I'm not going to display it, right? Or do you want me to?
You are
I
displaying.
am displaying. Okay. Kathleen,
You to have it.
Kathleen, if you could hear me, could you send it to Static Doc? download it as a good old DOCX and I have received it.
Fantastic.
We can see, did you already confirm that you received mine?
Becca, I've got yours. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to speak very slowly in starting 4A. So we're going to move on to item 4A. We're going to present the recommendation. We are not today going to prioritize them. Since this is the first time that we're seeing the focus area 1 recommendations. This is simply an information item for us to begin to process and consider the formal recommendation. So these are drafts. We will go in the order that they are in the scored handbook, if that is possible. So we're looking first.
What is first?
The first one is cost and financial accessibility. So when your group is called, whoever has chosen to speak, we'll put them up on the screen so everyone can see them. And if you'll just read them aloud because it's hard to see them, that way the group can just begin to process. Wonderful.
Is that the right one? Okay.
Breakout group 1.
Rebecca, are you our speaker?
That's convenient. Yes.
I'll help you out a little.
I just put a cough drop in, so enjoy that. All right. First, we have 3 draft recommendations. The first is the RDI TPA Workgroup recommends that the state of California create a specific loan/grant program to fund the candidate TPA fees based on need. If the candidate qualifies and serves as a teacher in California for a certain number of years, the award becomes a grant. If the student does not teach in California for the identified period, the award will be treated as a loan and must be repaid. This recommendation is necessary because the assessment fee can be a burden and a barrier for credential candidates. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this barrier by covering the immediate costs while preliminary credential candidates are students and incentivizing the remaining in the profession. Okay. Oh, I forgot. I'm scrolling, but I'm not in charge. All right. The RDI TPA Workgroup recommends that a defined time period be created between the TPA submission and before TPA scoring begins to review candidate submissions, identify those that have scoring issues, and allow students to resubmit without incurring additional costs. This recommendation is necessary because currently too many submissions are returned with condition codes that may be easily corrected and don't reflect the candidate's skill or ability to demonstrate mastery of the TPEs. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by reducing the number of non-scorable submissions and reduce excessive costs to credential candidates. The RDI TPA Workgroup recommends that the CTC examine the current credential program standard implementation practices of the TPA, IDP, and ILP, and the original guidelines for such implementation, and identify where guidelines need to be enforced, revised, and/or additional guidelines created to reflect current needs. This recommendation is necessary because solutions to issues currently identified may be due in part to flawed or inconsistent implementation. It will also address the candidate's experience of the TPA as a disconnected, high-stakes demand with little impact on their actual professional practice. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by ensuring accountability and reassuring the public and the professional community that the TPA is a critical part of teachers' career-long learning progression.
Thank you, breakout group 1. We'll move to equity and accountability, breakout group number 2.
Is that correct?
Yep. So we took the recommendations and kind of clustered them into themes to make the overall change. The first, focusing on equity and culturally responsive practices. The work group recommends that TPA center culturally responsive, sustaining, and equity-focused pedagogy by requiring candidates to incorporate culturally sustaining practices that are directly responsive to the backgrounds, identities, and cultures of their students in their learning context. And design and deliver equitable learning opportunities that address systemic/institutional barriers facing diverse student populations, including multilingual learners, students with exceptional/different abilities, and historically underserved groups. Thirdly, demonstrate asset-based pedagogical approaches that value and build upon students' strengths, experiences, and community assets/knowledge as central to their teaching practices, and disaggregate and analyze student data, for example, by race and ethnicity, language proficiency, and exceptional needs to inform instructional practice to provide a high-quality educational experience. We put a star next to exceptional needs when we're referring to special education, because that's not necessarily a term we found that everyone was familiar with. So that might need to be clarified. This recommendation is necessary because we're still working on this one because of the inequities that exist within our current system. This is intended to explicitly address those inequities. Second theme was focusing on accountability for equity and disproportionality. Recommend holding preparation programs accountable for addressing disproportionate TPA success rates by requiring TPA providers to research and publish findings on inequities, particularly by race and ethnicity, in order to redesign the assessment and support programs in reducing these disparities. So it's a both and. So not saying, hey, prep programs, you need to fix this, but TPA providers need to actually get involved, research, publish those findings, and redesign the assessment, and then work with the prep programs to address the disproportionality. This is necessary because evidence shows that candidates from underrepresented groups face systemic barriers, and we didn't want to just say, oh, these issues are simply because of the systemic barriers that candidates are facing, but there's actual issues with the assessment. But there's just a note there for that and ... is what I just shared right now. So what are these things systemically, but also within the design of the assessment that contribute to lower success rates, which perpetuates inequities in the teaching profession? This is intended to address these disparities by fostering transparency, providing actionable data to preparation programs, and promoting equitable outcomes for all candidates. Next theme was focusing on assessor practices and scoring. The work group recommends retraining assessors to prioritize evaluating candidate knowledge. There's a lot of discussion about focusing on what the candidates are able to do, over penalizing problematic errors, and revising scoring practices to focus on what can be assessed and not just dismissing it because of the condition code. Additionally, assessors should receive training to deepen their knowledge of the specific competencies and contexts they are assessing. For example, culturally responsive teaching or ethnic studies. That wasn't included in the list of recommendations. That was something that came from our discussion of assessors having more knowledge of what they're actually assessing. This is necessary because rigid scoring practices, limited content knowledge, as was just discussed, and condition codes often penalize candidates unfairly, diverting attention from their core teaching competencies that they demonstrate. This is intended to address this by ensuring a fairer and more accurate evaluation of candidates, emphasizing substantive teaching skills over superficial compliance. So folks just going through the motions. All right. Candidate support, we're almost there. We recommend including a reflection question in the TPA to gather candidate feedback on the support they received in their prep programs. That was just kind of an addition to the TPA because that way you can get that feedback from everyone, not just the people who passed. This recommendation is necessary because understanding candidates' perspectives can identify gaps in preparation and inform improvements in both teacher prep programs and the TPA itself. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address alignment issues by using candidate feedback as a means of accountability for preparation practices and ensure better support for future candidates. Candidate readiness. We recommend positioning the TPA as one of multiple measures of candidate readiness, allowing candidates to demonstrate mastery through additional coursework or approved assessments or implementation of UDL principles. Cue Patricia.
Well, it just goes to showing like, do our candidates have the ability to demonstrate their knowledge in multiple ways? And then how do we work that in the redesign of the TPA? And so that's kind of what that UDL principles, not so much UDL itself, but just those principles around that universal design.
That might be a parenthetical.
Let me ask just a clarification. So not, I mean, because the UDL is included in the TPA for candidates to demonstrate, but actually, are you saying having the assessment itself apply the UDL principles?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
So however we need to reword that, again, this is a draft.
It's all good. It's all good. I just wanted to make sure.
That's why we were late, because we kind of popped this in there.
So yeah, it might be a parenthetical, right? We're applying UDL principles there. So this recommendation is necessary because relying solely on the TPA may not fully capture a candidate's readiness, especially when considering diverse preparation pathways, candidates themselves with learning differences, and individual strengths. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by providing a more comprehensive and equitable evaluation framework, ensuring candidates have multiple avenues to demonstrate their teacher competencies. Might be done.
Thank you. We're breakout group number 2. We're going to move to breakout group number 3, which was formative value.
Oh, you can just scroll, keep scrolling. Some of our notes. Okay, so we had lots of fantastic discussions in our group, but the recommendations that we ultimately came up with were first, that the TPA provides substantive and differentiated feedback that includes clear and actionable next steps within 2 weeks of submission. This is necessary because the current overall score and rubric scores do not provide candidates with enough information to determine what improvements are needed. And implementation of this recommendation is intended to address that by giving candidates specific feedback to guide their necessary growth for resubmission or the development of the individualized learning plan to use during the induction program. Second recommendation is that the TPAs allow candidates to use the feedback received to revise and resubmit individual sections that were failed as many times as necessary to achieve a passing score. This recommendation is necessary because the profession needs strong teacher candidates who are competent and capable of supporting California's diverse student needs. I'm gonna add something there that I feel it should have been. Also, we found it really problematic that currently if a student fails a section, they have to redo the entire thing. And so this would allow them to just redo the section they failed. So implementation is intended to address this by allowing the process to be more formative for candidates with an emphasis on continuous improvement. Third recommendation, programs provide ongoing feedback to candidates prior to submission to guide their preparation of the TPA. That's necessary because candidates need feedback throughout the process, not just after the TPA. Programs need opportunities to see firsthand where candidates are in their development in order to provide clear guidance towards improvement. And so this would allow programs to provide support throughout the development of candidates, and it would ensure programs are responsible for guiding candidates in their improvement and development. We also recommend that programs score their candidates' TPAs, so return to the local scoring model. And that's necessary because programs are tasked with the responsibility of ensuring candidates are able to implement the TPEs. This would give candidates a better understanding of where programs a better understanding of where their candidates are in their learning. They're involving the programs and their teacher education faculty in the scoring process in order for them to be aware of where candidates are in their development so they are able to effectively support candidates. Recommendation 5 is that candidates be able to submit their initial TPA or TPA resubmission when completed. So kind of just rolling, like you can just submit it when you're done. You don't have to wait till a specific date. Current submission dates restrict candidates who need to submit or resubmit by delaying their ability to seek employment. Having access to faculty for support often requires candidates to incur additional tuition costs. And so allowing them to be able to resubmit sections that they failed during the preparation program would eliminate that. So I think, yeah. Okay. And then this recommendation 6, if recommendation 2 is adopted, this wouldn't really be needed, but it's a recommendation that we apply the secondary passing rate to any candidate that does not meet the primary passing rates. This is necessary because this expands the opportunity for all candidates to demonstrate proficiency through multiple measures, lowers the high stakes of the TPA. This recommendation addresses that by placing the burden on the program to determine if the candidate is prepared, improving the standards already in place for candidates who meet the current secondary passing rate, which is monitored by the CTC. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, breakout group number 3. And our final breakout group is the Integrated Educator Preparation Continuum.
Best I can do. Oh, sorry.
All right. So I can't read that one. I'll read it over here. I'm sorry to give you my back. Oh, there you go. Thank you. So the RDI TPA work group recommends that the CTC develop a continuum of educators' practice, connecting the TPEs with the CSTPs to reflect the development of learning to teach as a lifelong practice. The TPA would be situated within this continuum, reflecting a point in time in a teacher candidate's development that would inform areas of strength and proficiency as well as growth as a candidate progresses through a pre-service program and into induction. In this way, the TPA informs development of the ILP. This recommendation is necessary because the full spectrum of a teacher's development from beginning to advanced practice is not captured by a cohesive structure of standards, assessment, and credentialing. The continuum would ensure that TPA tasks align with the expectations within induction programs and would ideally prevent duplicative work. This recommendation is intended to align TPE and CSTP expectations, promote formative growth plans using a TPA performance on the continuum, and prevent duplicative work. In addition to that, because there are so many variables that would have unintended consequences by simply saying, let's move the TPA into the induction world, we don't agree with that. And so we recommend the continuum, and you probably notice that this is linked to some of the others as well. Also, I think it's important for us to note that preliminary programs are typically offered at IHEs, whereas induction programs are not. Induction programs are offered by LEAs or county offices of ed, and there's a lack of articulation across those communities, which we feel this continuum would bridge.
Thank you, everyone, for those initial recommendations. So we're just going to allow some time to contemplate, think about those. But as part of item 4A, we now need to open for public comment. If there are members of the public that would like to make a comment, please notify the meeting moderator by submitting a request card sitting at the front table, or by clicking on the raise hand icon if participating through Zoom, or pressing *9 if participating by phone. Public comment is limited to 2 minutes per speaker. The public comment period is now open. Are there any public comments? The public comment period for this item is now closed. With that, we're going to move into 5A, and then we'll take a break because it'll take some time for the tech to get that set up, and that'll be a nice opportunity for us to take a break.
Move into 5A. All right, we will do that. So 5A is developing the consolidated recommendations. Does our work group staff have a presentation on this?
So the second process, or the focus area 2, same process. Everything you just did, you're doing it again with the focus area 2 document. And so it should feel sort of like old hat at this point, familiar routine, you know. We do have new groups. I think there's only 1 or 2 of you that had to take your third choice, everyone else. So I apologize in advance. And hopefully this mixes you up, although I did not do any cross-referencing. So let's talk about the different themes. And so for focus area 2, the first theme is scaffolding and sequencing tasks. This will take place in room 151 and will be the work of Alyssa Brown, Kathleen, Mandy, Alia, and Vanessa. Theme 2, theme B, oh my gosh. Theme B is faculty implementation. And this will take place in room 152 and will be supported or comprised of a group that includes Beverly Young, Juliet Walletner, Helen Hazeman, Matt Wallace, Devin Beasley, and Alicia Herrera. This is absent. C is TPA flexibility to improve embedding. That is room 153. Oh, Ben, you got to be in there twice.
Do we get to vote twice?
No. That is Ben Odell, Kathy Krisha, Joshua Lori Harvey, and Ben Odell. So leaving us with Delta, systems alignment and collaboration. Tina Sloan, Patricia Camarillo, Jason Morgan, Ursula Estrada Reveles, and Rebecca Sackett in room 158, which is here. And so those are the groups. Again, those are the best groups that we put together based on the suggestions that you had. I am staffed to facilitate the process. I'm not here to tell you what to do. So, as usual, there is the guidance for those of you in our virtual audience. If you want to jump into the different Zoom rooms that will be opened in about 5 minutes. This is your guide to which Zoom rooms correlate with which topics. And so with that, hand it back to you, Madam Chair.
Let's go ahead and transition to work groups. You want to do the same amount of time, or do you want to extend the time given that we went over yesterday?
Start with an hour.
Okay, let's start with an hour then, and so we will reconvene at 11:20. 11:20.
It is time is of the essence on this one. I'm such a
When you keep the presence.
Wondering.
Where did you?
When we go through prioritization, is it literally just to order things that appear on the page, or is there a cut point where certain things are,
I don't think we're just using this
Yeah,
as
clearly.
whole time you all are going to start. It's going to be to move from
I'm wondering because there's things with negative scores that people are opposed to on the group, including technically right now. Because we need to represent. Unless,
yes, a negative item.
right, but then my question is, does everything end up going in front? You see what I'm saying? Or is there a tough point?
I think at some point we'll have to eliminate things that contradict each other,
Yeah.
right? But I don't think it's necessary to eliminate.
No, I was just thinking, you can't take a cat out of the bag after, you gotta put it back in the bag once it's out.
No. Well, and we don't want to put this,
I just, they're not dogs, so, but,
put the CTC in the position of having to choose between.
oh, I do not 100%, but at the same time, if there's something that's entirely.
We are going to come back together. Thank you for your hard work in your breakout groups. We would like to do the same thing we did before so that everyone has the opportunity to see the recommendations that came out of your breakout room. So we'll go in order that they are in the page. And we just ask that you read them aloud so that we know what your recommendations were. And then we'll spend the next month synthesizing and thinking about the recommendations. After we go around the room, there'll be an opportunity for the public to speak. And then after that, we'll break for lunch. And then when we come back from lunch, we will see the presentation from staff regarding the accreditation process and induction. So with that, let's turn to breakout group A, who looked at scaffolding and sequencing tasks.
Oiled machines.
All right, so recommendation number 1 was our preliminary recommendation. We were still kind of fleshing out our ideas, but here we are. Recommendation 1, the RDI TPA work groups recommends that the workload required by the TPA be reduced for candidates by implementing length restrictions on written responses, eliminating duplicative activities or overlapping tasks, and all TPA artifacts and activities are contextualized in real-world teaching contexts. This recommendation is necessary because the current expectations of the TPA are overwhelming to candidates, high stakes, duplicative, and summative in nature. Reducing the workload allows the assessment to become more authentic as it is contextualized in real-world teaching context. Number 2, we recommend that the TPA allows for multiple modalities for submission components. This recommendation is necessary because the expected writing components can be overwhelming to candidates and cause a barrier that creates inequity and racial bias as well as unnecessary stress. The implementation of this recommendation is intended to address the multiple types of learners that exist among teacher candidates. Multiple modalities will address many of the current condition codes and barriers that prohibit candidates from completing the TPA. And lastly, we recommend that the TPA be broken into 3 segments with the TPEs specified that are contained within existing coursework and reflected in the program standards. coursework that is assigned and evaluated by faculty should be used for the TPA submission. The intent of this recommendation is to not expand coursework or programs, but to revise learning outcomes in the coursework to align with the TPAs and the TPEs and the TPA. This recommendation is necessary because current TPA practices cause overwhelming stress for teacher candidates and are duplicative in nature due to the inability to submit coursework. The implementation of this recommendation is intended to reduce the overall stress experienced by the candidate, provide more opportunity for prompt feedback and continuous improvement. Thank you. Develop authentic and meaningful growth opportunities for candidates and keep scrolling. Eliminate the duplicity of experience.
All right, thank you, Group A. We're going to look at Group B, which is faculty implementation.
So while Adam is bringing that up, I'm going to say that we actually made a change. Scroll up to change it from faculty implementation to program implementation. We talked a lot about local scoring. Can you scroll just a little bit? So we said that by local scoring, we mean institution or program-based. So now you can scroll, sorry. So we recommend that, or the RDI TPA workgroup recommends that programs score their own candidates' TPAs. Related to that work be done to identify the current barriers as well as the necessary resources to enable programs to score their own candidates' TPAs, and that programs participate in ongoing CTC-sponsored statewide moderation, sampling, calibration, and cross-fertilization in what works in scoring and feedback. The recommendation is necessary because decontextualized, centralized scoring allows programs to not gauge the quality of their candidate submissions. Local scorers have better knowledge of the specific context in which the candidates are teaching. Implementation is intended to address this by requiring programs to engage in scoring their candidate submissions as a way to learn more specifically about the program's areas of strength and areas for growth. Recommendation 2. Recommends that programs use the data from the TPA to engage in programmatic continuous improvement, including curriculum review for alignment with TPA cycles and tasks. This recommendation is necessary because TPAs provide data on what candidates have learned and are able to apply in their teaching to address equity and disproportionality in results. Many programs may not be aligned with TPA tasks. Many candidates express that coursework and TPA tasks implementation is intended to address this by requiring programs to directly engage with the data on their candidate submissions. And our final recommendation is that programs be required to provide candidates scaffolded and sequenced feedback on their work throughout the process prior to submission, and current guidelines for acceptable support be examined and revised to ensure the entire process be formative and educative. This recommendation is necessary because candidates need formative feedback on the various components of the tasks in order to reflect on and develop their praxis prior to submission. And implementation is intended to address this by requiring programs to provide feedback to candidates throughout the process to guide their ongoing development and their preparation of their final submission.
All right, we're going to go to breakout group C, which is TPA flexibility to improve embedding.
Okay. I believe that's us. All right. I'm sorry, I had to wordsmith one more thing. Okay. So we did have a lot of really rich discussion, but we basically came up with 3 recommendations. The RDI TPA workgroup recommends that the TPA is embedded in both fieldwork and coursework. As part of embedding the TPA in fieldwork, candidates will receive and implement feedback on their teaching and be assessed on their implementation of feedback. This recommendation is necessary to enable programs to prepare candidates to address local and contextual factors and align with program methodologies. The RDI TPA workgroup recommends that candidates have opportunities to submit evidence for the TPA using multiple modalities audio, visual, written, and collect multiple points of evidence for their teaching across multiple settings. This recommendation is necessary to make the assessment more accessible and equitable for all candidates teaching across multiple settings. The RDI TPA work group also recommends that a portion of the TPA be locally scored and that the TPA model sponsors provide resources to train and support institutions to score a portion of the assessment. And by portion, it could be interpreted to indicate one task of the TPA or a percentage of candidate submissions. In accreditation, programs will demonstrate how they are using data from local scoring to inform continuous improvement for the institution. This recommendation is necessary to ensure program accountability and the study of program impact on candidate preparation and practice. Implementation of these recommendations is intended to ensure that programs embed the assessment in ways that are formative for candidates and are responsive to local and institutional contexts, provide candidates with multiple equitable opportunities to demonstrate the breadth of their teaching, and ensure that programs understand candidate practice and use data from that practice for continuous program improvement.
And now we'll look at D, which is the system alignment and collaboration.
Okay, I think I was nominated to be the presenter here. These are ideas, as all of these are, that we will continue to work on. The first one is recommendation 1, diverse collaborative convenings. The RDA TPA workgroup recommends that the CTC convene regular statewide gatherings of the entire preparation community. By this, we mean TPP faculty, assessment designers, LEA administrators, mentor teachers, the candidates themselves, scores, etc., to engage in multi-directional feedback and collaborative learning that informs both the teacher preparation programs and the assessment itself. This recommendation is necessary because the current practice of involving limited stakeholders in meetings and a unidirectional focus on the implementation lacks sufficient stakeholder perspectives and scope of improvement. Diverse collaboration is essential for fostering continuous improvement in both program practices and assessment design, and ensuring alignment with real-world teaching and equity-focused practices. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by creating structured opportunities for stakeholders to review current practices and identify gaps in alignment between the TPA and prep programs, analyze recent assessment results, including both quantitative and qualitative data, calibrate performance expectations and scoring to ensure consistency and fairness across evaluators, share effective practices, and collaboratively develop strategies to improve both the TPA and its integration into TPA prep programs, and facilitate meaningful contribution from all community members, ensuring diverse perspectives are incorporated into continuous improvement efforts. Second recommendation has to do with the collaborative examination of candidate data for articulation across sites. The RDI TPA workgroup recommends strengthening the requirement that TPPs and site-based administrators and teachers collaboratively engage in TPA data review and analysis for the candidates they work with. This recommendation is necessary to foster mutual responsibility for candidate development and success, ensuring that both preparation programs and school-based practitioners are aligned in supporting candidates effectively. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address the disconnect that currently exists between programs in IHEs, LEAs, COEs, and the school-based practitioners or sites where preparation also takes place by creating authentic opportunities to collaboratively review TPA data, inform practices and teacher prep programs, and enhance effectiveness of classrooms where candidates are teaching. Recommendations 3 is sort of a score training light for all teacher educators, and teacher educators would, I think, essentially be everyone working with candidates. The RDI TPA workgroup recommends that a scoring training process be required for all educators involved in the preparation of new teachers. While less extensive than score training, this process would engage educators in examining evidence using the TPA rubrics, and ideally occurs during the first year the educator is part of candidate preparation. This recommendation is necessary to improve educators' understanding of how to analyze evidence of practice in alignment with the TPA rubrics, enabling them to better support candidates in preparing for the TPA, as well as analyzing their own teaching practices. Additionally, this training would enhance collaboration in examining the candidate work that was recommended above. Implementation of this recommendation is intended to address this by requiring CTC or assessment sponsors to conduct or support this training through structured gatherings, accessible materials, and ongoing professional development opportunities. This process would ensure consistency and understanding and application of the TPA rubrics across all educators involved in candidate preparation.
Fantastic. Thank you. I just want to take a moment to say thank you to everyone. It's really incredible to see the outcomes and the work that's happening. I don't know about you, but it feels great to have tangible items that align with the discussions that we've been having. So thank you, everyone, for your work today. With that, we will now open for public comment. If there are members of the public that would like to make a comment, please notify the meeting moderator by submitting a request card or by clicking on the raise hand icon if participating through Zoom, or pressing *9 if participating by phone. Public comment is limited to 2 minutes per speaker. Recording Secretary, are there any public comments?
Yes. Carrie Morgan, please unmute your microphone and share your comment.
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
We can hear you.
Okay, good. I kept getting the message not allowed, so sorry about that. Hi, everybody. Carrie Morgan. I am a director with San Diego County Office of Ed, work with multiple credentialing programs. And yesterday I was in here because I work with induction, and boy, did we have a group of induction people in here watching the what was going on yesterday. So I popped back in today because I do work with intern programs. And so the TPA really speaks to me. And I just wanted to say this whole process is fascinating. I love that I can pop in like this from my work and listen and observe and just take it all in. And what I wanted to say is a lot of the suggestions I'm hearing, we're already required to do. The program standards, the common standards. And so I'm hearing these commonalities and I'm like, okay, we have to do that. We have to do that. But maybe it looks a little different across the state. And that's why we're having these conversations. So I appreciate that. The two things that stuck out to me today that caused me to raise my hand are the suggestion of the TPA going to 3 segments was the word, but I'm going to say 3 cycles versus the 2 cycles that it is now. And if I recall correctly, it was 3 cycles many years ago, and we switched it to 2 cycles. And so just want to be mindful of that. There was a reason. So sometimes we forget the history and repeat it. And then another thing is the idea of local scoring. It makes me a tad bit nervous. It is a choice right now, local scoring or centralized scoring. And so the description of local scoring made me smile a little bit because it kind of is turning into centralized scoring if you're going to have us calibrate throughout the state. So I just highly suggest we keep that option open for centralized versus scoring. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here today. Are there any other public comments? All right. And with that, that concludes item 5A from yesterday's agenda. So congratulations, we did that. It is now 12:10. So let's call that 12:15. And we will recess from 12:15 to 1:15 for a lunch break. At 1:15, we will return and we will pick up on today's agenda item, which is information item 2B. I did it. All right. So with that, let's take our lunch break.
To reconvene. So I just wanted to remind everyone here that after we're done with this, we will be coming back to the commission and we will be reviewing recommendations for accreditation. So thus, we've invited these wonderful people here today to share with us regarding accreditation. In addition to that, because the thought about induction had already surfaced, we actually asked them to cover accreditation, as well as provide you all with an overview of the induction process. With that, I'm going to ask each member to introduce themselves to our work group team, and we'll start on that side.
Good afternoon. I'm Karen Sacramento, consultant at the Commission. And Cheryl Hickey, I'm one of the administrators. Thank you. Erin Sullivan, I'm acting director of Professional Services Division right now.
Miranda Gutierrez, I'm an interim administrator right now.
I'm Fifi Lau. I'm the research data specialist at the Commission. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very grateful to you all. So with that, let's go ahead and begin.
I will start just to give you a little sense of how we're going to do this. We've tried to break it out into chunks. We're going to take some time after, for instance, we're going to do kind of an overview of the accreditation system, what it does, what it doesn't do, et cetera. Then we'll stop and have some opportunity for you to ask questions and make sure everybody's kind of following along. Then we'll jump in a little bit more and do a deeper dive into the standards. Oh. Make it.
It's not like the full screen.
The second sort of chunk that we're going to cover is where the TPA and its TPEs are covered in the standards, where it's used in accreditation, and do a little bit of a dive into our dashboards, which is why we have Fifi here, so she can kind of show you what institutions see on their dashboards related to candidate experiences and candidate success on TPA, and then also what we share with our accreditation teams when they do their site visits. And then finally, we'll do a deep dive into induction, and we have the wonderful Karen Sacramento here with us. If you work in an induction program at all, you know Karen. She's been our induction expert for many, many, many years, and we're sad to be losing her soon. But we're so happy that we could get her this one last time. And so she'll talk a little bit about induction and where the TPA and its TPEs actually do integrate with the induction program and how that continuum sort of carries it over. And again, we'll have a chance for you to ask questions after each of those chunks. And then probably Adam has some ideas for work after that, but we're here to answer any questions that you have. And with that, Miranda, we'll begin as soon as we can make. That's so odd. And while she's fixing that, I might just note that there's some people around the table who actually have some good experience around accreditation. So Kathy Kresha was on the COA for a number of years. Just finished in June, I think it was, right?
Yeah.
June. Yeah. And then of course, Beverly and Tina were both on the strengthening and streamlining of accreditation project that was sort of the last big overhaul of accreditation in 2016. And of course, many of you being accreditation coordinators, I know Juliet, Ben, so I acknowledge the expertise in the group.
And it appears that Karen has a following. I see several induction.
It's a fan club.
That'll be the resolution, right?
She did, and it's still there.
Close everything else. Okay, so.
Educators that all have empathy with this experience.
Oh, sure. 100%.
Never been.
I don't know what you're talking
Better check your all.
Let's try it again.
Check your all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now,
You can go ahead and share. You don't have to.
but it's, I think it's still that, let me put it in. Patient mode.
There you go.
Okay.
Right.
And then
PowerPoint is.
the vast.
Yeah,
What in the world?
bottom right corner, it's like a slider.
Yeah, on the computer, it looks fine. Yeah. In the room. The projector.
Pages control laptop has the same big. Laptop, see that one, this one, sees it before.
Comes to work, you can share it with me and I can present. My computer's been working all day.
Okay.
For the presentation. If you share it with me and email it to me, then I will be, as a clicker, say next slide, Adam.
Okay.
That's good.
I'm just making it smaller on my end. Oops. That's odd. Wait.
So we are.
Okay.
Adam.
What we're just gonna do.
Within the other mode.
Okay. Who's controlling that? You is. Great. So patient.
Yes, go into your presentation mode.
Do you want me to go in presentation mode?
No.
Okay.
I would give it to Adam.
Okay.
Give it to Adam.
Send it on Teams and I'll make an instant.
Super.
The PowerPoint.
Signs are your problem.
Yeah, it was not 100%. It is.
To do a good joke. Kathy, can we channel? Our COA co-chair Bob Frelly?
No.
Always has.
He always had such good ones. They were.
You want to see one?
Yes, go Juliet. Okay, my daughter's been saying it. What do you call a barefoot mystic?
Oh, now I can't.
It's gonna be a pun.
All right, now we know. You
I know, I gotta remember it. Well worth the wait.
I know. Well,
Barefoot ghost walks around with really bad breath. Oh, a barefoot ghost with fragile bone density who walks around with really bad. Forget that.
Please share the video of this with your child after
Me trying to tell it.
shaking you. They'll be shaking. their face.
Catalyst fragile mystic hexed with halitosis.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay.
Much better if my daughter was delivering.
Right, almost there.
Funniest part of this joke was you're trying to.
So many times.
hide you. I am here. Off my video. You mean?
No.
Thank you for
Cross
your
our fingers.
patience, everyone.
Hope it works.
PowerPoint presentation may be the death of us.
I know. It mysteriously lost a couple of
Yeah, we lost
slides.
4 slides 30 minutes ago. Then we couldn't restore because it said someone had a version open, even though none of us had it open. So we're very grateful for Vince and Chris for helping us.
All right. So far, so good.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, yes, all right. Thank you, Adam.
Saber.
And now Miranda Gutierrez.
Started. Been waiting patiently. Thank you. We can go ahead and, so as mentioned in the accreditation overview, I'm going to start with a little bit about the commission's authority as it pertains here. So the commission's authority is grounded in education code, and we've listed the sections there for if you wanted to put those up sometime. But education code states that the legislator recognizes that standards of candidate competence and performance and criteria regarding candidate preparation are as essential as the assessment of a candidate's competence and performance. So within the commission's authority is the accreditation system and framework. And what the framework does is it sets forth the policies of the commission regarding the accreditation of educator preparation in California. Accreditation responsibilities include adoption of a framework, establishing standards, appointing members of a committee of accreditation, which Cheryl mentioned. We have a former member here in the room with us. And also the Committee on Accreditation evaluates, or excuse me, it appoints members to the Committee on Accreditation to evaluate accreditation within the system. The Committee on Accreditation makes decisions about the accreditation of educator preparation. These decisions are made on the initial accreditation of new programs as well. And the Committee on Accreditation adopts guidelines for accreditation reviewers and monitors aspects of the accreditation system. Additionally, the commission adopts the standards that are implemented by the programs. The committee is also charged with making the accreditation decisions, which are also grounded in education code, which we'll talk about a little more later. And then the commission also has the authority to charge accreditation fees for specific and certain accreditation activities. So this is a look at our accreditation in numbers. The commission has 252 approved program sponsors at the moment. You can see the breakdown here. The largest segment are our LEAs, which include school districts, county offices, and charter schools. And there's 168 of those program sponsors. Those LEAs primarily sponsor teacher induction programs, but also administrator induction, intern programs as well. Our second largest segment is the independent and private universities, 51, CSU's 23, UC's 9, and then we have one other, which is AXA, the Association for School Administrators. So again, looking at our accreditation in numbers, of those 252 program sponsors we accredit 936 total programs. And this expands from the preliminary programs through added authorization, teacher induction programs, people personnel services programs. In total, we have 334 preliminary preparation programs. So that's your multiple subject, single subject education specialist, and the new PK3 early childhood education specialist instruction credential. Additionally, I mentioned that we accredit new programs as well, and we currently have 24 additional preliminary preparations in the pipeline. So our total is going to increase, and these are the programs that are responsible for implementing the TPA.
So accreditation works on a 7-year accreditation cycle. Of our 252 program sponsors, we split them up into 7 cohorts so that in the 7-year cycle, one cohort is completing a specific activity. So annually, we collect data, Beefy will go over the accreditation data dashboards in a little bit. But every year annually, institutions are submitting data to us on candidate enrollment, demographic data, and those types of things, which we'll talk a little bit more later. In years 1 and 4 of the accreditation cycle, we collect preconditions responses from institutions, and preconditions are basically requirements that are grounded in statute or commission policy. In year 5, institutions submit program review and common standards review, and the program review is them demonstrating to us how they're meeting the standards, which will inform a site visit in year 6. The common standards, which are also submitted in year 5, are how all programs collectively and how the institution as a whole is supporting educator preparation. And what that does, the common standards and a program review, it informs the institution's site visit in year 6 of their accreditation visit. And again, everything leading up to year 5 leading up to year 6 really informs the site visit team that goes in and reviews the institution, talks to their constituents. And then year 7 is typically a follow-up year, if any follow-up is needed based as a result of the site visit. So it could be a revisit in year 7, submitting quarterly reports, submitting just a 7th year report. There are various types of activities that could take place in that 7th year. But again, annually we're collecting data. So there's always something that institutions are providing to us within the 7-year cycle.
If I can just real quick, part of program review for preliminary programs that have a standard requiring them to ensure that candidates have the opportunity to learn, practice, and be assessed on the TPEs. One of the big pieces of evidence that they have to submit to us in year 5 as part of program review is a matrix that has all of the TPEs listed down the left-hand side. And then we ask across the top that the institutions list all of the courses for their program. And then in the body of the matrix, for every TPE, there has to be at least one link to where it's introduced, one link to where it's being practiced, and one link to where it's being assessed by the program. And those links go to direct places within a syllabus that shows course assignments, course content. It might show rubrics for the assessment. The assessment link in the matrix cannot be the performance assessment itself. So it's meant to show us sort of where candidates are learning and practicing and where the program is giving them some feedback prior to them getting to the performance assessment itself. So just kind of tying in that big piece of evidence for you.
This chart right here kind of just outlines our 7-year cycle across the top. I'm not sure how well you can all see it, but across the top are 7 cohorts, and then down the left-hand side are the year. And so it goes through and connects. If you're in the yellow cohort and you come down to 24, 25, right now everyone's doing certification for SB 488. So there's no specific accreditation activity taking place right now. But if you were to look at yellow cohort 25, 26, you will see that they have program review due next fall, October 2025, with their common standards due in the spring of after the submission of their program review. And this chart is located on our website, so you can kind of get an idea of where different institutions might be in the accreditation cycle right now.
And what's not reflected on this is that annual accreditation data that's provided. So even if you see blank spaces here, in those blank spaces, they're still submitting accreditation data. And even in the spaces where you see preconditions or program reviewers, that the accreditation data is being submitted annually. Matter.
Sorry. The sensitivity on the trackpad is.
And it's an apple, which I have. Might as well handed me a bomb.
So only touch the arrows.
Obviously, we're giving you a really a bird's eye view of the really high level view of accreditation. And there's a lot of nuance here. We're happy to answer any questions, but so the site visit really is the culmination of all these activities. And so we have about 35 to 45 site visits a year. If you divide the total number up of programs, many programs within those institutions. And so basically the site visit is the culminating review, and it's when the team makes the decision. And remember, we're talking about a peer review system. So we haven't mentioned the Board of Institutional Review, but they are people like you that come from either educator preparation programs or they are practitioners in the field who are trained and volunteer to do this work, where they look at everything that the institution has provided. So they'll look at all of the program review documentation. So that's the actual, the candidate handbooks, the syllabi that Erin was mentioning, the matrices, all of those kinds of things. So all the documentation for program review, for the common standards, which are the institutional level, the larger level standards. They will look at our accreditation data dashboard that Fifi's going to show you in a second. So they'll look at assessment results. They'll look at program completer survey data. They'll look at the mentor completer survey data. They will look at other forms of data that are available and anything that the institution provides. And then they conduct interviews over a course of a few days. And they will come together and they'll make decisions based on all that information on the standards. So they go back to the standard. One of our big mantras in accreditation is, what does the standard say? So if I can impart any sort of keep in mind, if it's not in the standard, we're not looking for it or we're not enforcing it. So the standard really is absolutely the important part of the accreditation system. And I think, Beverly, you probably taught me better than anybody that, where does it say that in the standard, Cheryl? So it's really important that we emphasize this with the team. So the ed code actually dictates the type of decisions we make, that the teams make. They can only make the decision of full accreditation. And we have modified that a little bit to say there can be follow-up as a 7th year report. Like if something is really super minor and they've already addressed it, we just want to make sure it's being maintained. The Committee on Accreditation can say, we still want to see a 7th year report afterwards. Or accreditation with stipulations. And we have various levels of severity in the stipulations. We have your basic accreditation with stipulations, which tend to be things that are technical in nature or can be fixed quickly. Or we have major stipulations or probationary stipulations. And we have definitions for those. And then, of course, there's denial. And denial is sort of the last ditch kind of thing. If we see that really there is no hope for, for making change. They're causing harm to candidates, they're fraudulent, whatever. And so we try not to go there, and we don't often have to go there unless, we go to probationary in most cases before that there's a denial, to give the opportunity to make improvements. I think one of the big things also is that the system is, we keep saying this for many, many years, it's not a gotcha. We're trying to work with institutions. What we want to do is make sure institutions make continuous improvement and address issues. We have a major teacher shortage in California, so removing programs is not our intent. Our intent is to bring everybody up to the level of the standards. And then the follow-up on stipulations are required. The general rule is they must be looked at within 1 year. The COA over the last, I'd say 5 years, has really emphasized being on institutions before the 1 year is up. So they have really gone to making pretty routine quarterly reports from institutions to make sure progress is being made in addressing stipulations or issues that were identified by the team. There are some times when the institution's making good progress, but they need more time. The COA can also grant them more time. So, but generally 1 year is in most cases the timeline for when institutions must address issues.
If I could just say one thing, and I don't know how consequential this is, but it is I think kind of an important detail. So the accreditation decisions apply to the entire institution. If an institution has a number of programs, if there's one program that's just really in terrible shape, the COA does, it hasn't been this way historically, but it has been this way now for over a decade. The COA does have the authority to vote to shut down a single program. rather than penalizing the entire institution and all of its programs. So there is an ability there if a program is really just not meeting the standard and it can't get there. The COA can ask that program to shut down. So it's a little nicer nuance to have than, especially if you have an institution with 22 programs. You know, you don't want to penalize all of the programs for one. Maybe they just need to shut down and never offer again, or maybe they just need some time to retool and then come back later.
Okay. That was my first bullet on this, on this slide. It's okay. It's perfectly fine. So the actual accreditation decision is for the institution as a whole. So, and as you've seen, you know, we have institutions that are very, very small. There may be a charter school that has only induction, all the way up to the large CSUs that have 20 to 30 programs, you know, so they range quite a bit. But the decision is made for the entire institution. And again, we do have, the stipulations can be for specific programs, specific standards within programs, and also, you know, the ability to shut down a program if the program is the problem and the institution is fine. The other comment I was going to make here, these are sort of the big tenets of accreditation. It's a peer review system, and that's a really important matter. So we have the Board of Institutional Review. We have trainings 2 to 3 times a year for new Board of Institutional Review members. I mentioned there are volunteers from the field. And from them, we have team leads. We have people who do program review. Some people do common standards review, but we do have an important training component to make sure that we're trained and calibrated and that kind of thing. And then also the COA membership is also part of the peer review process because those folks come from the field as well. So that is intentionally divided in half between K-12 and higher education. And the co-chairs are also share. So we always have one co-chair from higher ed and one co-chair from K-12. So it works out really, really well. The other thing to mention is that the decisions are grounded in either statute regulations and most especially in the standards. So, you know, we get to the statute and regulations a lot of times in what we call the preconditions that we can review and say, yes, they're doing it. No, they're not doing it. But where the real, you know, gray area sometimes can be is in the standards. And that then we lean on the professional development, the professional judgment of the reviewers based on, you know, that's why I say if the standards are explicit and clear, it makes it really easy, much easier than if the standard is very vague and then we're trying to figure out, well, they're doing this. Does that fit within the standard? So really important that it's always about what does the standard say and that the standards apply equally across regardless across the similar credential programs, regardless of who's offering it or the variations in how institutions are implementing the standards. Mary likes to use the term 1,000 flowers blooming. California likes to have flexibility in how institutions can implement the standards. And as long as they are still meeting the standards, your program design could be different. Your, you know, the way you address your local needs can be different, but all programs of the same credential type must meet the same standards. And then one last thing I wanted to mention on sort of basic tenets is so far to date, it's been really important part of that no single piece of data determines the accreditation status. That data is taken as a whole. It's part of the information loop. You may want to change this because I've heard people say, you know, all right, this institution has a very low pass rate. Maybe that's something for you to consider if this tenet is still should be still part of the accreditation system or not. I know many years ago, the national accrediting bodies for teacher ed was pushing like an 80% rule on some exams, and California pushed back pretty hard at that point in time on we don't want a single use of it. It helps us understand what is going on. And that's what teams do. They look at these pieces of data and they go deeper to try to figure out what might be happening at that institution to cause these numbers. So that's where we're at with this. And we wanted to just stop here, I think, and ask, this is again, a high level of accreditation done in however many minutes. So we're happy to answer any big questions or questions on the big. Any questions?
So I'm wondering about, we begin to consider the information that you've shared with us and begin to develop recommendations. are there any points in the accreditation standards that you would encourage us to look at with a close eye?
Yes, I mean, I think, so we have a handout that we prepared and it's just sort of some basic thinking that might get you thinking about what's in the standards and is it specific enough to what you would like to see? And that may help you with some recommendations. I don't know if it will help or not, but we put some ideas out and I'm happy to pass it around. We did post it. But I think when we get into I think we're going to get into the TPA specific things next. And so, but we do have some thoughts.
I have a quick question about the year 5, when they provide that matrix, and you have the listings of the courses and then you get the one link, correct? One link. Is there a reason behind the one link? Is it just amount of time? Is it personnel? And then my other question is, are there any classroom visits?
So the first part of your question, let me clarify a little bit more on that. So typically, the TPE concept is introduced more than once. So it isn't 1I, 1P, and 1A for each TPE. Typically, the A may be 1, but what we ask programs to do is limit to no more than 4 of each of those for each TPE. So for each TPE, they could have up to 12 links. They could have 4 I's, 4 P's, and 4 A's. We do ask that because initially we didn't have a limit, I don't believe. And sometimes what we'd get is an institution throwing the whole kitchen sink at us. Or they would say, well, it's really embedded throughout our whole program. And so we're going to link it 25 times. And so we had to back that off because it's time consuming for the programs and it's time consuming for the reviewers to look at that many links. So we've asked programs to really think about their best their 4 best I's, their 4 best P's, like really think about where the strongest places are for you to focus the group to find that evidence. And so that's the only reason for that limitation there. It does make programs kind of really identify their strongest piece of evidence because that matrix takes a long time to put together and it's pretty dense. It takes a long time to review. Are there classroom visits? So do you mean do the teams visit K-12 classrooms or do you mean do the teams visit the classrooms of students at the IHEs or the?
That's what's it's a little difficult because of the programmatic needs of every program, right?
Right.
But are there any visits to any kind of teacher education?
Yes. Yeah. So the site visit, so all of the evidence that we kind of talked about leading up to the site visit team, when we're able to do them in person, which we have historically done, and since COVID, we've gone back and forth a little bit. We've gotten very adept at doing remote site visits, but nevertheless, whether it's remote or in person, we still interview the same groups of constituent types at all of the site visits. So along with institutional leadership, and program leadership, we also interview faculty. When I say we, I mean the teams. Interview faculty, interview students, so groups of students from each of the programs offered. And if the program is offered in multiple pathways, so maybe it's student teaching and it's also residency and it's also intern and maybe it's also integrated. We want to see candidates from each of those program pathways because each of those pathways still has to meet the standards. So current candidates, we like to get them from different points in the program. So if it's a 2-year program, we'd love to see some folks maybe who just started, some folks who are right in the middle of the program, and some who are getting ready to complete because they all have different kind of perspectives on the program. We also interview their mentor teachers. We'll interview their university supervisors. We will interview credential analysts. Faculty, I think I mentioned, but we also interview completers. So we ask the programs to please reach out to folks that have completed the program within the last couple of years. So not too far out, but recently. And we interview those folks as well. So there's a lot of constituents depending on the type of program that we definitely.
And I just want to add employers too. I just want to add that. So the program review, the common standards review, and the data review are all sort of like, they're the document review. They're those pieces. You can't really get to how effectively something is operating until you actually talk to people. And so that site visit is really critical because on paper, it may look great. they may have all things, but then if you hear from candidates, we know nothing about this, we've never been told this, and it's coming from everybody. Then it really helps you understand how effectively something is being operated, and the team then has to try to figure out where's the breakdown or where are they strong. So it's real important.
I just throw in, unless they change, the institution doesn't pick who is interviewed. Right. They give a whole list.
We don't do that. We don't do that. No, because it's just a level of detail we can't do, but we make sure it's a representative sample. So if they're in like 5 different locations, we need to talk to everybody and people in those 5 different locations, and we make sure that the numbers are high.
Right.
That's the
So
big key.
they've got 150 candidates in their program. We want to talk now. We can't see all 150. The site visits are 3 to 4 days long. But we like to make sure that we're seeing at least 20% there. The higher the number, kind of the smaller the percentage. If it's a small program, let's say they only have 30 candidates in their program, we will tell them, get all 30 candidates here. We want to talk to them all. That's doable.
My follow-up question was what Beverly mentioned, because I sit on WASC, and so one of the internal conversations we have when we go to a school site is we look at the demographics. And so then I'm asking myself the question of like, when I visit the parent, when I meet with the parents, am I see the demographic that I see on paper? So is that the same internal conversation that the committee is having when they're going to a specific site? Because they can vary. Are they getting a representation of the demographics or the needs of the populations being served?
Yes. Yep, absolutely.
Questions?
Yes. Question. So in bullet point 2, you mentioned that only a small subset have TPA expertise. Can you kind of speak a little bit more to that? And then if we were to change or make some recommendations, would we need to say something about ensuring that they have expertise?
Could be. Okay, so let's take a large CSU, because I think that's a good example. So you have, maybe they have 2 PPS programs, maybe they have an admin program, maybe they have a multiple subject program. So you have to have you have to have reviewers who know those credential areas. And so the balance has always been, how do we get the smallest number of reviewers? Because you can't bring 30 people to an institution. How do you get the smallest number of people that have the expertise enough to make decisions about the standards? And so that's a constant balance. So we always have somebody that knows multiple single subject. A lot of those people may, and this is a lot of those people may have had something to do with TPA, but maybe they're not the TPA person that's appointed by their institution. But they maybe have some. It's very hard to make sure you cover all of the needs in building a team. And so what we try to do is, do we have a good cross representation? Do we have enough people on the team that know the areas of the credential program that we're looking for? Oftentimes the team lead has some experience. So it's a very challenging part of this job, is to make sure that there's the right expertise at the table. And then we also have staff that's available during all so if there's phone calls, if they're not able to have that for some reason or another, there's somebody that they can ask.
I don't know that we've ever had so I think with this, only a small subset of the entire team would have TPA experience. I don't know that we had somebody, for instance, be the multiple subject or single subject program reviewer on a site visit that says, I don't know anything about TPA. They're typically not a brand new faculty member. They're usually a program director, or if they're faculty, they've gotten to a point where they have a level of expertise that makes them a good reviewer. And that level of expertise, I don't like to speak, if I haven't surveyed everyone, but I don't think we've probably ever had somebody on a site visit looking at a program that has a TPA requirement that doesn't know about TPA.
Right. When you select people, do they fill out an application?
Yes, but what we're asking them is, what is your program area of expertise? It's like a survey, but we will say, like, what's the program you teach in? What's your level of expertise? With that program, how many years have you been doing it?
But we could potentially recommend asking an additional question about their
experience. Very simple.
Okay.
Absolutely.
This is extremely helpful to situate the work of committee from my point of view. Part because it reminds me that a lot of the concerns about TPA are that it's expected to do a lot of heavy lifting in a lot of areas of providing evidence, primarily, of course, for the candidate who is the one who is the subject of really assessment, but also for programs. I mean, we've heard people talk about this sort of gap, potential gap between what's happening for the candidate, what's happening for the program, how to build more coherent communication systems. I guess my question to you all is, are there things that the TPA doesn't have to do in order to be able to aid and assist you in making accreditation decisions? I mean, in a sense, I'm really wondering where this whole committee or work group fits into the accreditation picture. Because in a way, you're focused on multiple measures, multiple indicators, multiple contact points. You're looking at systems, you're looking at different tools and data. But in a real way, we're not. We're looking at an instrument that might have 12 scores on it. We're looking at a assessment regime that might really only focus on aligning tasks to a set of standards to know whether that credential candidate is capable of demonstrating that they're ready to teach to those particular competencies. I'll use that word as a placeholder. So again, what's kind of this positionality? I got this big picture now, but I have to go back and do work on TPA.
Mm-hmm.
I almost wonder what you would be recommending based on your broad and deep experience we should be thinking about, given that you have so much data you're already looking at.
I think Cheryl, I think you're right. I think you've actually positioned us to kick into the next chunk. A little bit more at the next.
Give me $20.
Yeah. Thanks for the softball. If there's no other questions about kind of the high level, we can jump in, I think, and start to address that next level of thinking here, right? So we will, for the next few slides, be talking a little bit about where the TPA, where that nexus is with the accreditation system. This link, if you have this electronically up at some applicable standards, that will take you to our standards webpage. So if you want to take a deep dive on any of these, a little bit more than I'm about to, you can certainly do that. So we have a number of places in the standards where the TPA is not necessarily explicitly addressed, but what the standard asks for and what it requires ties back to different parts of the TPA and how it's being embedded or not and deployed within the program, et cetera. So Common Standard 2, so at the Common Standards level, we have Common Standard 2 and 4. Common Standard 2 is all about candidate support. Part of that candidate support is supporting them in preparing for things such as the TPA. So there are some requirements there we like to see, candidate handbooks and things like that. And honestly, if we saw a candidate handbook for a preliminary program that we knew candidates had to take TPA and it didn't talk about TPA, that would be probably something we'd want to ask about at a site visit or sooner. Also, Common Standard 4, continuous improvement. So this is a relatively new standard for us. It was added when we did the strengthening and streamlining a few years ago. There is a requirement for the commission that institutions and their programs be constantly collecting data about the effectiveness of their programs and their services to their candidates, et cetera, and evaluating that on a regular basis, quarterly, biannually, whatever works best for them, as long as we can see that it's happening and it's strong, and that they are looking for areas where they can make improvements within their own programs. And one of the pieces of data that they have to use, the standards call for it, they need to be considering their performance assessment data in that continuous improvement process. So, and they have access to that performance assessment data regularly. They can go to Results Analyzer and find out how their candidates are doing, I think on a monthly basis, Reggie, in real time.
Real time.
Yeah. So they have access to that. So, and they're expected to take that into consideration for Common Standard 4, and it's something that they will show us. As part of the evidence that they supply for Common Standards review, we ask, what is the list of evidence that you're evaluating in your continuous improvement program? What's your cycle? Who's involved in that? So we get that level of data for that standard. Of course, Program Standard 2 for our preliminary gen ed programs talks about preparing candidates toward mastery of the TPEs. And of course, the TPEs are what are being measured on the TPA. And I will say this, I think we know the TPA does not measure all of the TPEs, but the matrix that I mentioned does ask to show us evidence of where all of the TPEs are being developed, are being introduced and practiced by these candidates. So that matrix is big picture. It's a little bigger picture, I think, maybe than the TPA. Program Standard 3, clinical practice. We know that a lot of candidates are going to be completing their TPA and their clinical practice. So we have requirements around candidates being put in settings where they can be supported, where they can do video so that they can take their TPA. So programs often have MOUs with the local education agencies where they're placing their student teachers that have agreements with these LEAs that our candidates will be able to do the things they need to do in your classrooms to take the TPA. Otherwise, we don't want them placing them there. Program Standard 5. Program Standard 5 is the only standard that we have that explicitly addresses the TPA. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but it is the only standard that we have that explicitly addresses it. And the language of that standard, as Cheryl was mentioning, how explicit or not explicit that standard is or can be made can certainly drive how we in accreditation can measure an institution's deployment of the TPA in support of its candidates. So that'll be an interesting one, I think, to look at. Then as we get candidates starting to move out of their programs, there is still a nexus between the standards and the TPA. So the individual development plan that is required to be developed between programs and their candidates at point of exit, should be taking a candidate's skills and abilities as measured partly by the TPA into consideration, because the candidate is going to take that document with them and carry it into their induction program. And that's where Induction Standard 3 comes in. And one of the first things that induction programs are going to do with their new candidates is develop the ILP, which is their individualized learning plan. And they will, in doing that, they look at the IDP, they take a look at what the candidate's skills are, and they work with that candidate in a triad setting. It's usually the administrator, the candidate, and whoever the candidate's induction mentor is going to be. Karen will talk a little bit more about this, but they look at what the candidate's skills are, some areas where the candidate maybe needs some improvement. They can take their performance on the TPA into consideration in developing that. This is where those things are. You have a question, Orny?
Yeah, this has been really interesting. And while you're doing this, I'm looking at this document that you gave us. And it's real interesting to see where the standards and the TPA cross. But what I notice in there is that over and over, it says not explicit.
Right.
TPA,
Exactly.
TPA not mentioned, TPA not mentioned. And even the specific one about the IDP, it's stated 6, which to me is a critical bridge. It uses the word that request that they develop an IDP. And to me, that's like a big red flag.
It is. I will say that, oh, you're probably about to say this.
No, I was just going to say, even like Common Standard 4 or Common Standard 2, let's say, the candidate support talks about using data about candidate readiness to enter the profession. It doesn't actually say performance assessment data. So that's the kind of thing that I think that you all can kind of take a look at and say, we need to tighten this up, or it's just perfectly fine the way it is, whatever, but there are a lot of places that, if I ruled the world, I'm like, let's make this more clear, because it just helps the consistency across reviews, I think. And expectations.
I would think that if one of the things that we want to accomplish is to strengthen the TPA's role in accreditation and having programs be more accountable for how they support candidates and their pass rates and their remediation. I think what would be helpful is if it were possible to get not the whole list of program standards, but if staff were able to give us the places in program standards where TPA could fit, either it already is there and could be more explicit, or it could be an obvious place to add or something. That one of our tasks might be to review those spots in the accreditation standards and see where those might
And that's what this document was trying to start that conversation.
I mean, if we had the language itself.
Okay,
Oh,
sure.
Just not the whole set of standards. Yeah. That but just these spots where staff thinks that this would be a logical place to address these issues. I think that would be really helpful for us.
Dinner placemat for
Yeah.
production. I love them.
One of the things that you mentioned, Beverly, it's hard for me not to call you Commissioner Young still. The IDP carryover. We did hear several years ago, I think it was prior to COVID, that we heard from induction programs that said these candidates are not coming to us with this IDP, and it's so critical. So we modified our program review required evidence pieces to now require that preliminary programs show us an IDP and ensure to us that those things are actually being created. Now, if a candidate feels sheepish about what is on their IDP and they don't then carry it over to their induction program, that's on the candidate, I guess, at that point. But we did really drill down on that and put some requirements in place to make sure we were seeing that.
The standard still says it's just a request.
I know. Nobody's balked at us for saying.
Can I ask why? I recognize the importance of word choice. IDP, ILP. I've been wondering this for a long time.
It's also in admin programs, it's the IIA. It's the
IIP.
IIP, yes.
And it's
Because we like acronyms.
Right, but I was just, from my vantage point, it makes it feel like two different documents.
Yeah.
I'm a candidate,
Right.
right? And so I know for a fact, induction programs definitely start with the ILP. And I know for a fact, like programs have an IDP that's continuously happening throughout the program. I'm just not sure if people are seeing them as two different things instead of something that fits in the continuum of like from one program to the next. So I was just wondering if there was any conversation or thought or, you know what I mean? And I recognize
There hasn't been on
development
our
learning.
part, but there can be.
Yeah.
And I don't want to steal Karen's induction thunder later, so.
I would just quickly say to follow up on that, because we got confused with that in one of our submissions for something. And because I remember it was in our intern program reactivation, because we were using measure and they're like, oh no, we mean this. And I'm like, okay, no, really. But yeah, the acronyms but definitely. And I do remember though, honestly, just from my work, on the COA, same deal, but these acronyms that we have in education are just out of control.
I just want to get confused and think.
And they do.
Because they have to do something new and develop an ILP, and so spending time where they already have it, because when you leave the program, you leave with this is what I'm going to work on next.
Yes.
But then I have seen also like, and who knows, time has changed, but I've seen where like, hey, we're gonna develop an ILP, everybody, in induction. So recognizing could be gap years between candidates, right? Like, so it's just this interesting dichotomy where I'm wondering about that carryover,
Well, and I would just add, even in the induction standards, because the standards were, writing of standards does not always happen sequentially. And so even in the induction standard, it's called the preliminary transition plan. And I think induction programs have really integrated something coming forward to launch and inform the development of a learning plan at the initial stage. So some kind of, transition plan, whatever that looks like. Even candidates, I think, when asked about an IDP, they don't know what that is. So what do you have that you are bringing forward so that we're not just starting with nothing, that we're starting with a point to launch and inform practice building upon what you've done. So I hear you
If
there.
I can keep us, we're less than halfway through our slides and more than halfway through our time, and maybe slides will answer questions. But we do have another break for questions and absorbing. So this one I won't spend a lot of time on it. It's been up for a little while, but we did think it was important to just mention. So statute uses the word embedded. Talk about where the TPA and how the TPA is supposed to exist within programs. However, it doesn't say that in our standards. And as Cheryl mentioned, if the standards aren't explicit, we can't enforce it. Meaning we just don't have any leverage to go in as an agency and say, we are going to enforce this thing. A program could push back and say, well, your standards don't say we have to do that. So there is no current standard right now that mentions the word embedding, or really addresses the topic of how the TPA is integrated or embedded or whatever word you want to use within a program. So, you know, that could be a critical piece to maybe take a look at. We just wanted to mention that. This is program standard 5, and yes, you have some pieces of this in front of you. This is the standard that talks about implementation of the TPA. In this standard, it tells the programs that they're responsible for providing administrative support to the candidates, accurate and timely information. We had a conversation recently about what does timely mean, but accurate and timely information to their candidates and their programs about the TPA and its requirements, supporting the candidates with faculty that's knowledgeable about the TPA. And then there is a section in there, which is a very odd thing for us to have in the standards, but there's a section right in the middle of program standard 5 that gives specific examples of this is support that is acceptable. Well, this is support that is required of programs to provide to their candidates. This is support that's acceptable, and this is support that's not acceptable. And that not acceptable is, for instance, I don't know, the most egregious thing you could think of, right? Faculty can't resubmit they can't edit a candidate's video and resubmit it for them, that kind of thing. But that is interesting because nowhere else do we have that kind of a language in our standards. The standard also talks about providing remedial support for candidates when they're struggling, keeping TPA data at the candidate and the program level, and then of course, assessor qualifications. So this standard talks about all of the things for the TPA. It's not as big as you might think for covering all of these things. So if you haven't looked at program standard 5, that one slide that I had early on that had the link at the top, you can go take a look at that. Have I gone beyond? No,
Can we just go back? Sorry. To the last one. Can we go back to
okay. Nice.
The assessor qualification within the institution that you're in?
Yes. So
the institution isn't assessing.
Well, if they have chosen to do local scoring, they have to demonstrate.
As far as we know, no one goes in to do.
Oh, that's not necessarily.
No, they have their own. They have their own. We don't. In our group, we didn't know of anyone who does local scoring of Ed TPA or Cal TPA.
I don't know that that's the case. Is there really no one?
You're probably right, but we just didn't know of any.
It is a point of information for our meeting going forward, Adam, that we need to actually know who is doing local scoring across the system. Because that's going to matter with recommendations going forward, the next item.
Yeah. So really that should have a precursor of if local
And it does. It does say for institutions that use the local scoring option, we need to see some assessor qualification.
Yeah, that makes sense to me now.
Making a note.
Okay, I will do my best. I got the little time over here from Cheryl. Okay, so TPA results are used in accreditation. As Cheryl mentioned in year 6, we ensure that, institutions have access to their data dashboards regularly. They can see everything all the time. Only some of what's in those dashboards ends up on our public website. So the broader set of information always on the dashboards. We provide moment in time access to those full dashboards to our site visit teams, starting at about the 6-month mark and moving through the site. And we tell the institutions, your team is going to have access to all this data. So if you haven't looked at your TPA data or your survey data or whatever, definitely get in there, because the teams are, if they find something, then they want to ask you about it. You don't want to get caught flat-footed. So those dashboards include fallen behind. No, we're very close. Survey data on how the candidates are doing on the TPA. So this is completer surveys. So candidates do completer surveys. We do have some questions from them. So I think the group had talked about adding a question on the TPA from to the candidates about how well they felt supported or prepared. We do have a question like that now in our completer surveys. But that's at the point of the candidate has then been recommended for the preliminary. So they've already passed the TPA. And then we ask them as part of our surveys, how well supported they felt on the TPA.
We don't hear from people who failed.
Not on our completer surveys. They may have taken it a number of times though, right? And they have an opportunity to talk about that. The dashboard also has the Title II information on it, and that has TPA results. It includes data on these TPAs at the rubric level. So you can really drill down on these as the institution, but also the reviewers. We really do try to get them in there and get them working and wallowing in all of that rubric level data prior to the site visits. First time pass rates have not been used in accreditation typically. So we're looking at ultimate pass rates. How many of your candidates are ultimately passing the TPA? That's the level that we're looking at currently on the dashboards. We have, as Cheryl, I think, alluded to earlier, we have no standard or requirement right now that addresses institutions that might have low pass rates. There currently is nothing required. It isn't that we need to be told to do it, but if we wanted something in the standards, there isn't anything in the standards that says an institution with a pass rate for their candidates below a certain level is automatically put on, probation or something. We don't have anything like that currently. Yes.
So just a point of clarification, then if I'm inferring correctly, the instrument is consequential for the candidate because they may or may not be advanced to credential. It's not consequential for the program because it may or may not be penalized. In fact, it won't be penalized as a result of a low pass rate.
Unless we change that language.
Just want to clarify, so if it's very consequential for one group stakeholders, it's actually not consequential for another.
We do, I will say we do, so our performance assessment team, which is it's not a huge team, it's about the size of everyone you see right here. They look at that data fairly regularly. They will reach out to an institution if it seems like they're struggling, and they'll have some intervention conversations with their TPA coordinators.
But for us, it really is about accountability, and that's
Well, what I was going to say is that I think what you're saying is true, but it's also, I think it gives a little bit short shrift to the teams because the teams do then say, what's going on here? And they try to dig deeper and say, okay, what are the candidates saying about it? And where is the problem? Are they not getting support? Or is the TPA being administered too early? Is it, they're trying to really figure out the why behind it. So that's, I think, important, but by and large, the number itself is not consequential, but it does lead to some consequences, I would say, some stipulations. It could lead to stipulations.
Again, this kind of goes back to our accreditation system hasn't been developed to necessarily be, no, I don't want to say that. I want to say the opposite. The accreditation system has been developed so that we can provide support to institutions and bring them up to a level where they are meeting the standards. So if they aren't, we need to work with them to get them there. Because of course they have candidates in their program, and that's double-edged sword, right? I'm pretty sure I know what somebody might scream at me after I say this. If we shut them down, all of those candidates now are sort of disenfranchised. We can find them new places, but that's really jarring to those candidates. Obviously, being in a lousy program is also very unfortunate for candidates. So our preference is to try to get the candidate up to the level of standard, not the candidate, get the program up to the level of meeting the standards so that we don't have to send all of those candidates out to look for another program and, feel like they're starting.
Beverly, can you describe for us, if there's an institution that has a stipulation, they have a year, and then they come back, tell me how that's helping the candidates that are currently in their program. They are not passing a TPA.
So depending on the stipulation, they don't go away for a year. The COA has been really strong about saying, we want to see something in 2 months at our next meeting. Tell us what your plan is. And they come back, what actions have you taken? They have used the quarterly report thing a lot now. And I think Kathy can probably attest to that. So they have they have moved from just waiting a year. They did not feel comfortable waiting a year for a lot of things. And so anything with a major stipulation, probationary stipulation, I can almost guarantee there's quarterly reports, and there's often quarterly reports with the highest level of stipulation. So,
And even before the COA was requiring those, I absolutely will come to you. Staff would work with the institutions, but those quarterly reports actually gave staff a little more leverage. If an institution was being, truculent in any way with the staff member, well, I don't really want to do it or I'll get there. Saying you are going to have to report to the COA in, every quarter this year, that helps us sometimes keep an institution on track. Really.
Right. When I understand what you're saying about it's not to be punitive or to shut down programs or whatever, but if there are other elements of the program that are consequential enough to give them stipulations or put them on probation, something like this with a low pass rate or not good support to struggling candidates would seem to certainly rise to that level, because there's nothing more consequential to the candidate than getting a fail.
Yes.
So I think we should pay attention to that. The other thing I wanted to ask about this is, you talk about dashboard. Is there anywhere that pass rates for a program, either first time or eventual, are made public? Because I have seen certain programs that on their materials, we have 98% pass rate or whatever. And I think of it, and the ones with good pass rates will do that. And I think of people selecting programs in schools who compare programs, and like in a law school, you look at what's their pass rate for bar or whatever. And it would seem to me that prospective students should have the right to know publicly, whether it's on the CTC's website or something, how well does this program prepare you for this high stakes thing? You talk about it's in the Title II dash.
But that's on our public dashboard. So public facing is the TPA data that we're getting through their Title II submissions.
And if I'm a student and I'm looking at 3 different programs that I can't decide which one to go to, is that something I can find easily?
Yeah.
So, Fifi.
I can show you on the website.
But she's gonna show.
I'll look and see.
Actually, we're gonna show it anyways.
I think it's legitimate info that people should be able to judge a program by.
It is. So on our main webpage, there's a blue I think it's blue. There's a toolbar right at the top, the big one. All the way over to the right is an assessments, approved institutions.
Right.
When you click on that, candidates can look by institution and they can see where the institution, they can see all of that data. They can see demographic data, where are they located, but they also can see the TPA. Yep.
Sorry, I have one more question. I know you flipped the slide, but I'm trying to understand. You said that earlier in the presentation, you said if there is no standard, then you have no leverage.
If there's no language in the standard.
Yeah. But then you were just saying if there is no standard addressing low pass rates, but then you're saying, but you can put stipulations that could. Then is it the stipulate not following the stipulation then puts them into a place where you have leverage to put them into a probationary situation?
Stipulation wouldn't necessarily be related to low pass rates because there's nothing in the standards that talks about low pass rates.
Just trying to follow the train of like.
Yeah, no, but I think what might happen, a scenario that might happen if they have low pass rates, they probably are going to have candidates at the site visit that say, I cannot pass this TPA. I'm not getting any support. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Then we start to drill down on the candidate support piece and we end up with a stipulation on that piece of the standard.
Candidate support then in that you could say, hey, we have language that
requires you. Yeah.
We can go in any one of those standards that we're talking about and maybe even others. Those are the primary, they could be under candidate support. It could be under program standard 5. Something related to stipulation. It can be in any of those areas or many of those areas.
Yeah. Multiple.
I have a question. So I don't remember what table it was at the moment, but there was a table that we looked at that did not name the programs, but it was a graph that had the bars. Yes. And when you look at that, there were, I want to say, quarter that were performing at 60 or below. So if this line of logic is working, then why is it that we have that many programs moving at that?
So you're getting ahead of our presentation. That's a very good question because that data came from LPI. It's our data. I mean, it's the data that goes in our accreditation data dashboard. but they have the resources and ability to do that kind of work. We want that ability to do that here in-house. Mary knows that because I've been saying it for a long time. So the hope is that we have a system that we can build that does those kinds of things so that it's not just the ones in the accreditation 6th year of accreditation cycle, but we're looking at all institutions every year or more than every year, whenever it is. So that's part of what we need to build.
And so tell us more about that so that we can understand how we can help that happen.
So I think there's a lot that's involved in that. We probably need a group specifically for that, but defining the parameters in around what is the first time pass rates. Everybody's on a different schedule. Everybody's academic year is different. So who do we remove? Because you remember LPI took out some candidates, based on they were part of the pandemic or whatever. So, defining those business rules around data, coming up with the system that defines all of that, having the resources and the staff that can do that separate and I don't want to say separate and apart, but associated with the accreditation system that feeds into the accreditation system so that we can then target and look and go, hey, these 30 institutions seem like they're doing great. We really need to refocus a little bit on these 10 that really need some technical assistance. Now, we know that the program, as Erin mentioned, the program performance assessment folks do it as much as they can as well. But to build it and make it a routine, regular system of technical support, and then where we need to step in for oversight support. But yes, thank you, Mary. Come on here.
Thank me later. Also, Tina Sloan has her hand raised whenever I see you, Tina. Let's let Tina. Oh, Tina, please.
Oh, Mary, were you going to say something?
I was, in point of fact, going to say something.
Okay, well, I was just going to say that this conversation that we're having right now is a very fruitful conversation, a very important conversation, and a conversation that this work group can do something about. And I wanted to point to this extremely helpful document that you all put together about some of the concerns that have been raised by the work group so far. And two particular pieces, one on page 2, so 3B-2, under the row remedial support for struggling candidates, and the other one on page 5 under use of data, institutions with low pass rates. The kinds of questions you're asking here are really important for us to identify. For instance, if, as people have been talking about, there are consequences for programs that are consistently have low pass rates. What would constitute low? These are all the kinds of questions we need to answer. The other thing that we've struggled with for a very long time in our state is, where does the TPA reside? Is it a program requirement? Is it a credentialing requirement? It's currently a certification requirement. But as you can see, there are plenty of candidates who can finish programs without finishing the performance assessment. And it's those kinds of, it's programs who have candidates in that position that I think need to have a great deal more responsibility for what they do and how they reach out to those candidates, as well as in accreditation, not just describing what they did to help the candidate with the TPA, but also to understand what else did the candidate do, where in the other assessments is there evidence that this candidate is ready to teach. And I know there is a secondary passing standard, but I think we need to do more around that in accreditation as well, because as we know, we have a multi-system of assessments for accreditation and certification. And the last thing I'll say about this is, in the program that I used to run, in general, most of the time, the TPA scores triangulated, or pass rates triangulated with the other assessments the candidate did in the program. In other words, it was not very often that we were enormously surprised when a candidate did not pass the TPA.
Always hard to follow Tina slowly. So a couple quick things, if you'll permit me. I think this is a really important conversation, and you have some opportunities here. And I really appreciate all of the ways in which the team here has just presented what is, and then identified some areas of concern. So one of the questions that I've heard come up periodically over the last several meetings is this a certification requirement for a credential, or is it a program requirement? And I'm going to argue that it's both of those things based on statute. Is it in 44259 as a requirement for completing and getting a preliminary credential? But the way that requirement is framed is that a program must include a TPA pursuant to 4432.2. And that score is, or their score, their performance on that performance assessment is one area of evidence to lead to a recognition for a credential. So this is messy. It's messy and complex, but I think it's both a program requirement and a certification requirement is one thing. So in the issue of low pass rates, when we had the report from the Learning Policy Institute at the commission table, that was a very robust conversation at the table. And deep concerns emerged from commissioners sitting right along this side about, how is it possible that an institution with 30% first-time pass rates is still accredited? And that's what data does. It sheds light, and then you ask these kinds of questions. What should we do about that? So we had some of this conversation with commissioners already, and I think they're eager to hear your thoughts about what other things we might want to consider there. And some of the things that I've heard from commissioners and from others in the field include identifying, I think this may have been suggested at the commission table then, identifying a pass rate for a cohort of candidates beneath which maybe the commission does some kind of an intensive intervention because this suggests a problem.
And not even wait for their cycle, like in real time.
Right. So that goes to the very question that the team put on page 5 for you, which is, should action be taken against an institution with low pass rates, and what is low? So is it 65%, 75%? Is it first-time pass rates? Pass rates? You want, and an idea that I have, and if you'll permit me, I'm going to throw it on the table and you guys can grind it under your heel. You don't have to think this at all. It's just me wanting to play for a minute, and then I'll set back up. But, we have these 5-point rubrics on the Cal TPA, on the Ed TPA, and 3 on that rubric is intended to be the practice point that we're expecting candidates to demonstrate competence at. Ideally, every candidate gets a 3 on every rubric or higher. And they're in adopting the passing standard, the commission said no more than 1 score of 1. Think on each rubric, but either on cycle, just on one cycle, or on either side.
On the cycle, per cycle.
Per cycle. So no more than 1 score of 1. So it would be an interesting task for you all to look again at the rubrics and say, we'd be interested as an accreditation matter to see how far programs are by cohort from level 3. And let that be a guide for inquiry for an accreditation team. As just looking at how candidates are performing at the cohort level, how far are they from a level 3, which is goal, and what should you be asking as a team when you go to visit them? And what kind of first-time pass rates would you suggest the commission or the Committee on Accreditation consider be set as a point at which we move to a deeper level of investigation of a program or inquiry into a program? So thank you for allowing me to put questions on the table, and feel completely free, each and every one of you, to push it right off the edge. All right?
On that, the TPA allows any number of 1s as long as they reach the benchmark. Any number of 1s, as long as you reach the benchmark. I was aghast when I knew that when it was first introduced, but I was assured by Rachel Schoen that statistically that was the correct thing to do.
Well, that may be right statistically. Talking about numbers here, don't you?
I don't know.
Right? So
yeah, it isn't the same as Cal TPA. You can have 2 1s or even 3 1s as long as you make it up with the other numbers.
think all of that sits in the middle of your table work group to consider and advise the commission about what you think is a better practice or the best practice relative to how these data are used to inform accreditation and stipulations and possible probation, which isn't available to the commission. But of course, that also means that we all have to have confidence in that is used, the ways in which it is used, to make sure fairness, reliability, authenticity, all those things are present. And if you believe those things are true, or adjustments they could be true, then how you use it, how we use it as a state, is the next question. Thank you, Adam's chair, for letting me speak.
Since Executive Director Sandy got to chime in,
Exactly.
we have a deal where, so I just wanted to remind everybody of the statute around this in 44320.3, I believe. And that its performance assessment results shall be reported so that they may serve as one basis for a recommendation by the program sponsor that the commission award a teacher credentialing. Wait, that's not it. That's not it. Sorry.
Not the low pass rates.
Yep.
It's a new one.
It's in 12.3. It's in the new.
Two.
I could definitely foresee a recommendation saying that we need to convene a group to do some work on that. Right now, it just says low. It doesn't define what low is or anything like that. So I think we would make a recommendation to that effect, that a group could be convened to really do a deep dive on that and come up with an additional recommendation. I mean, I don't know that we have a margin of time to do that work here right now.
If you make the recommendation, truly, as Adam and I both said almost in chorus at the same time the other day, this is just the beginning. There's gonna be a lot of work to do after this.
Here is 9. The ensure that the aggregated results of the assessment for groups of candidates who have completed a credential program are used as one source of information about the quality and effectiveness of that program. The commission shall report the number of programs with low pass rates and assist these programs to use evidence-based strategies to support the candidates to pass the assessment. For all administrations of the assessment, there shall be no fees for these instructional supports. And this ties in with what we're talking about today, which is, we're here to talk about strengthening accreditation to do this work, right? And so what you've heard is that in Program Standard 5, there's no explicit language to look at pass rates, right? And what you've heard is that technical assistance is performed by a small team, and it's the word. And it happens. There's no mandate or structure. Right? So it's important to know that, especially thinking about the recommendations that you have generated today, and the focus area 3 is how do you take program standards and how do you take these recommendations that are emerging, and what parts of the standards and other aspects do you want to put your hands on so that programs that have low pass rates are getting mandated support, right? And that is all I would say.
Lots to consider.
So we still have some deep dive on induction that we want to make sure we do. So we're going to skip the data dashboards for now because we only had Karen this one time. She won't be here if we come back in January. So we can bring you data dashboards another time. And we're very sorry that we got all ready for this, but you should have access to your institution's data dashboards. So if that's something you're not aware of, I'm happy to help you with that at some point when you leave. It's definitely interesting to look at. But with that said, we're going to go ahead. Are we going to jump straight to induction?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon again. I know it's late in the day. But with this slide, I have the task and the privilege of covering about 30 years of induction in probably about 5 minutes, and maybe I have 15 minutes total here. So, and along those lines, I'd like to acknowledge those in the room who have had an important role in induction over this time as well. So, we are certainly made a difference. So today I'm just going to give a brief highlight on this slide of some of the major milestones. And since the inception over 30 years ago, of ITSA and then teacher induction, we know that it's gone through a very evolutionary process. Early 1990s, the BITSA program was first established as a state-funded program to support beginning teachers in those first 2 years. It built upon findings from the California New Teacher Project that indicated that new teachers participated in an induction program that included intensive mentoring, support, and assistance were not only more likely to be successful starting off in their first couple of years, but were much more likely to stay in the profession and not leave the profession within the first 5 years of coaching. And our data, the coaching data on BITSA retention over that time strongly showed this as well. And findings from the New Teacher Project study at that time also suggested that teacher success and effectiveness and retention could be greatly improved by thinking of teacher preparation and induction as a learning to teach system or continuum, beginning with teacher recruitment, continuing with that initial preparation, and moving into supporting new teachers in their beginning years of service. So then to hop forward to 1998 and SB 2042, which formally incorporated the completion of an induction program into teacher preparation and licensure and really extended the continuum by creating that two-tiered teaching credential with induction standards and programs being the path to the clear credential, multiple and single subject at that time, and then BITSA being the predominant route to earning that. And with that, then BITSA induction became the route to clear the credential and was both a categorical program funded by the CDE and then a credential program that was monitored by the commission. And I'm hopping through time. Going forward to 2002, teacher induction was made a formal part of teacher licensure. And over the coming years after that, a decision was made that any program leading to a credential needed to be included in the commission accreditation system. And these were built upon to include BITSA induction, really tightening that linkage between induction and credentialing. 1209, SB 1209 in 2000, another really important legislative act that required a review of teacher preliminary preparation programs and teacher induction programs, and for induction standards to eliminate duplicate requirements and reduce barriers in credentialing teachers, and that the focus on induction needed to be new teachers applying their knowledge and skills previously acquired in the preliminary credential program. So that kind of launched a way of thinking in that way. In the 2009-10 year, the state moved to several categorical programs. And BITSA was included into a large flexible block grant. And from 2009-10 to 12-13, LEAs were allowed to use those for any educational purpose. This was done to provide greater flexibility to LEAs to help them respond to budget reductions brought about by the recession at that time. But through this, direct state funding to the BITSA program no longer continued. Then in 2013-14, California did a complete restructuring of its P-12 funding system for education, consolidating revenue limit and categorical program funding to local control funding formula, LCFF, which included induction. Then in 2015, the induction program was under significant consideration to be completely eliminated due to thematic recurring concerns from constituents connecting with legislators and sharing that the induction program was just too repetitive still, too repetitive of the preliminary program, too burdensome on new teachers with the required formative assessment modules that were deemed just not relevant or applicable for their specific individualized needs. So in response to this and to the governor's mandate on this, in October of 2016, following the induction standards workgroup recommendations, new teacher induction preconditions and standards were approved by the commission as the sole route to earn both the clear general ed credential and the clear education specialist credential. And these are the current standards that approved teacher induction programs now operate under. These standards focus on a robust mentoring system of support for new teachers that is authentically based on the individual needs of each candidate. And they further eliminated that unnecessary duplication between the preliminary and the CLEAR program, eliminated excessive paperwork based on those processes of formative assessment, and really eliminated that cookie cutter uniform approach for all candidates. On the next slide, and as talked about on the—
Just a clarifying question, it's Brent here. What is the formative assessment?
So the formative assessment was the system around which BITSA and induction up to that point was built on. And it was a series of modules that each candidate completed together and moved through. And it was the way that completion was determined. So it was kind of a checklist of completing the portfolios. That's the portfolio. So CFAST, FACT. So it was a system of assessing the candidates in a formative way. And that's what they were built upon before the 2016. So as shared on the previous slide, the two-tiered system of the learning to teach as a continuum of development is very intentional and sequential in design and process. As you know, preliminary programs prepare the candidates at the initial level through required coursework, field work, performance assessment. And then the second tier of preparation, the induction program, extends that learning to application as that 2-year job embedded, individualized induction program. And again, really focused on that extensive support and mentoring to new teachers in their first and second year of teaching and based in the CSTP. The next slide really looks at the TPEs and the CSTPs and how they fit within this together. The TPEs and the CSTPs are intentionally aligned, continuity. The primary difference is the lens through which they're measured and utilized. The TPEs are the organizational and conceptual basis for what one needs to know and do as they enter the profession. They make up that body of knowledge, skills, and abilities that beginning preliminary candidates have the opportunity to then learn in their approved teacher preparation programs. And then the CSTP take it from there. They drive the continuum of learning to teach system in California forward once that preliminary credential is earned. They are the standards of practice for those in the profession applying the concepts and frameworks in their classroom through their induction experience. And a candidate must show progress towards mastery across the CSTP to be recommended by an induction program for their clear credential. And this really involves a much deeper application-based reflective inquiry process within the domains of all the CSTPs. So really a key distinction between the TPEs and the CSTP is their purpose. Within that learning to teach, the language is complementary, the domains align, but the CSTP is applied by credentialed teachers to help them bring about excellent skills and abilities. To the next slide. So in looking at a little more recent history, and due to numerous factors at the start of and during the COVID pandemic, the governor's executive orders and AB 130 provided for credential requirement flexibilities. And with that, allowed candidates who met specific criteria to defer the completion of the TPA until and into their induction experience. So this meant that many candidates came into induction during these years with the need to focus on passing the TPA while starting teaching and induction and while progressing in the CSTP for the clear credential recommendation. And additionally, a number of these candidates had not had the usual supported preliminary clinical experience. So they came into induction with that initial preparation having been interrupted. So the heavy burden of supporting these candidates with the TPA additional needs and requirements while also meeting the requirements of an individualized induction program fell upon the induction program and the leaders and their mentors. And while induction programs across the state rose to meet this occasion and serve these candidates, and really try to support the extraordinary needs specific to this time, it was a tremendously difficult task and ask. And especially because it did not align with our very design and intent of the induction program within our Learning to Teach continuum as that second tier of preparation for the credential system. Ultimately, even with tremendous induction support, many candidates did not meet the requirement to pass the content and pedagogy needed through the TPA that was originally meant to be a part of that preliminary program, also engaging in teaching, that job embedded application of induction, and seeking to earn that clear credential. So this led, next, oh, you're on it. Are you? No, okay. This led to Senate Bill 114, which was passed a couple years after that, last year, in 2023, addressing this issue of the candidates who did not complete the deferred TPA requirement, while holding those candidates to any other credentialing requirements on their credential. SB 114 provided a teaching performance assessment exemption for these candidates with the COVID-19 pandemic deferral if induction completion or 2 years of satisfactory teacher evaluations is met by June 30th of 2025. So I feel like I've gone through this really fast, but in summary, I'll just say, with the 178 approved programs, California has a well-established, very strong system of teacher induction that standardizes that extensive support and mentoring and is rooted in the California standards for the teaching profession, and that builds on the knowledge and skills learned through the TPEs and in the TPA in the preliminary program. Aaron spoke to this a bit, but it does this through that continuity provided from the candidate's individual development plan that's brought forward and informed by the TPA, brought into their induction experience as they transition and develop the individual learning, that ILP. A whole lot longer about that, but I don't have time. But that really is the transition process. It also does this by supporting candidates' teaching practice in a very cyclical and iterative, deep inquiry process that's strongly based in reflection and application. And I would say as a state, maybe lastly, that it does this by being anchored in the expertise and the dedication of the program leaders running these 178 programs and the veteran teachers serving as these highly trained mentors, kind of the heart and soul of both groups who provide just that skilled guidance to support the new teachers entering the practice as they grow and hopefully stay in teaching for a long time. So I have 2 minutes to answer any questions, but I would be glad to do so.
I have one quick one.
Please.
New standard 7 in TPEs. We moved all of our clinical work from we always used to use CSTPs at Stanford with our teaching credential candidate. We didn't do the TPEs. We decided that we would do the TPEs because there is the alignment that there used to be, because there's so much newer, the language, the verbiage of each of the standards is more modern. And I wonder whether there is any movement as far as the CSTPs about standard 7, about the induction program, because we're going to be having candidates leaving now who are going to be judged on standard 7 in their clinical practice with us. And there isn't a CSTP for standard 7. And it's likely, if I go by my own institution, that's going to be one of the areas where they need the most support. And that is not going to be in the CSTP by this August.
Yeah, thank you for that. And so the CSDP are recently revised and adopted just this last spring, and induction programs are transitioning. And I appreciate you bringing up kind of that, where that gap will need to be filled. I think induction programs are well positioned to adopt or to implement these new CSDPs, and then figure out where, the areas of focus need to be as they bring candidates who have worked under TPs that are not as recently revised. So
TP7 is the one that
yeah. And I think for staff providing technical assistance, that too will be an area over the induction programs transition to help them and give them support on. So thank you.
Any other questions for the panel? Well, thank you so very much. We're very grateful. I understand it. Fifi, go ahead.
Yes, just a real quick comment, just because I emotionally can't ask any questions right now, but if I remember to, next time, will we be able to ask you those questions? In email?
Yeah, we're here. We're
always here.
listening to all of your conversations.
That would be great.
And Fifi wasn't able to show you the dashboards that the institution and so she can come back, of course, too.
In January, if we'd like her back, she's available.
Karen's actually retiring, so we'll have Karen back.
I am.
Oh, my Karen stayed today.
First of all, congratulations on retirement. My first question, so I know the CSTPs were being revised. I know they've been accepted to roll out, I think next, I'm not positive. I think it's next.
In 2026 is when we need to see, yeah.
Are they, and I remember looking at them at one point, are they, because with the TPE revised and literacy TPE7 and the continuum where we have like side-by-side placemats, are they aligned or are they less aligned than they were?
The domains are still completely aligned.
Yes, I meant,
The new CSDP are revitalized and I would say more current. So that way, yeah, I mean, and we don't revise both at the same time. It's just with stuff but I think there's still subject alignment that makes a great deal of sense.
And then there isn't a TP7 or CSTP7.
Kathleen?
I was just gonna say, if you want me to show you, because I'm pretty familiar with the field with our,
yeah,
I don't want to be, but.
Well, and to be fair, you may not all have access to your institution's data dashboards. They typically designate specific folks that they want, but it isn't, I don't think, for secrecy purposes. It's just usually because they know certain people have to see them. And so if you haven't ever seen your institution's data dashboards, somebody at your institution can absolutely show those to you, but also so can we.
And just say quickly as well, for this year, we did remove the assessment section.
Yes.
We'll be able to see your TPA, your institution's TPA results. So this, my presentation, I will show you what you had seen before or you had access before.
Okay.
And we'll have in the future, we'll have reconsidering how to present the data. That's all. Especially because we have a deferral year of site visits.
So Fifi, if Fifi's agreed to, if we want to see more of that in January, she'll come back and show us kind of the back end. Just one thing before we wrap. So just from me, you're going to get more homework from me on this, right? So this is just the initial brush with content. There will be, which this was included in the past homework too, with standard 5 and all that. So this will include more inquiry into this focus area, as well as some considerations, and then we'll also have the ranking of the recommendations.
Have a comment from Tina, and then we have to ask for public comment.
A request before we wrap. Beverly started to request that if there are TPA language in any of the standards, could you identify those the way you have now? I had been thinking about this a couple of days before the meeting, and you all beat me to the punch, which is not unusual with this chart, by taking our recommendations and saying, where are they in our statutes? So I'm wondering if this is a process you can continue. And specifically, some of the things I've noticed is that some recommendations are within the purview of the commission and some require changes in statute. I think it would be helpful for us to know that question. A second thing is that sometimes recommendations are captured in policy, but not all that well in the way that policy is carried out in practice. I think you've captured a lot of that in your table. I think a third thing is all of the recommendations we have will have implications. It would be helpful to know as much as we can about those implications before putting these recommendations out for public comment. I mean, that's typically where we get a lot of these implications, but it'd be great to know now what those are. And then finally, with respect to our process, I've noticed at times in our small groups, we've had discussions about potential recommendations, and members have thought, oh, that's going to change the whole credentialing structure. We can't do that. Let's drop that. But in some cases, I'm not sure if that's right. So it's just to say, if members in a work group have questions, that there's a way that those questions could be answered somewhat immediately so that we can continue on with the discussion in small group about a particular issue. I know staff sits in with us, but I just want to see if that's an opportunity that we can bring staff into those questions when we have them. That's all. Thank you.
And the answer to that is yes. We
All
can
right.
involve staff at any time when we have questions in breakout groups or in the work group as a whole.
Well, then I would also say, if nobody asks a question, but staff is seeing that we have some errors in understanding, I would encourage you to just, jump in and say, here, actually, let me just tell you about X.
Thank you so much. Any other comments or questions before we open it up for public comment?
I'd like to acknowledge that we're past 3 o'clock. So are we asking for an extension on time for this meeting today? If so, how much more time? I'd like to also know in terms of process.
10 minutes.
10 minutes for public comment or 10 minutes total?
Minutes total.
We're going to do public comment and then close the meeting.
So on that note.
Yeah, I just say that I feel maybe like Linda, maybe not Linda, I can't read your mind, but I'm completely overwhelmed at this point. There's a huge disconnect between what today we did in our work groups, what I experienced in my work group for myself, and this work. Not that that disconnect shouldn't be connected, but right now it's disequilibrium because the ironically, they weren't focused on the problem of credentialing the California candidates. So it's not to in any way say I'm not glad to have learned. It's to say I'm in no place to make sense of any of this with respect to what we did today, 2 different areas.
And you're not expected to do anything with that today. That's on our plate for the next meeting.
That's sad. That's
So you'll let it sit, you'll let it marinate, and you'll come back prepared.
Yeah, it's just information in preparation for the next one, because the next one does specifically talk about.
All right. So we will now open for public comment. If there are members of the public that would like to make a comment, please notify the meeting moderator by submitting a request card or by clicking on the raise icon if participating through Zoom, or pressing *9 if participating by phone. Public comment is limited to 2 minutes per speaker. Recording secretary, are there any public comments?
Yes, Guadalupe Cardona, please unmute your microphone.
Hello, as a 25-year high school teacher and an adjunct faculty at Cal State Northridge, I have teachers and free service teachers in my courses. I know many new and really exciting and vibrant teachers and free service teachers who our students need very much in their classrooms, who are so stressed and on the verge of leaving the field or never entering the field due to the TPAs. The phenomenon is detrimental to teachers who come from, especially those who come from working poor backgrounds. And within that group, many of those teachers are teachers of color. not only do they have to pay for tuition for their teacher preparation, but they are also giving their free labor as part of the clinical practice. By the time they have to take the TPA, they're extremely stressed, not in the best condition for high stakes assessment. It's an extra layer of high stakes assessment that pushes these much needed teachers out of the profession. The cost associated with taking the TPAs, and in some cases retaking them, is prohibitive. TPAs are duplicative because candidates demonstrate proficiency in their coursework and in their clinical practice. TPA is a single tool that's being used to deny teacher candidates a credential, even though they are granted a credential from the teacher preparation programs that are also going through accreditation processes to ensure that they're hitting the TPAs proficiently. As I said before, within my role as a high school teacher, 25 years, and all the new teachers that I'm meeting and all the teachers I see coming through the programs, they are so stressed. They are so extremely worried about their ability to pass these TPAs. And so I just wanted to repeat that for the lesson. Thank you.
Request for comment.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment.
The comment period for this item is now closed. Do any work group members have questions or comments?
All right, with that, 3B is going to be at home work like we've done previously. So with that, we're gonna move to 4B, which is our closing remarks. Are there any closing remarks from staff or the commission?
Thank you.
I would agree. Thank you. Hard work. And you're doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Much appreciated.
Since I'm sitting at the table, thank you for it was a great conversation. It's always fun to bring what we know and what we do and engage people in that. So this was very enjoyable. Appreciate it.
Thank you to everyone for being here today. We now adjourn the December 2024 RDI TPA work group. Our next meeting is January 8th and 9th of 2025. Happy New Year, everyone.
Kind of exciting, huh?
It's exciting.